right. Welcome, Aaron. Thanks for joining on this episode. Today, I'm with Dr. Aaron Massecar, who has his master's and PhD in philosophy and MBA and is the executive director of the Veterinary Innovation Council. After completing his PhD in philosophy and then teaching for 5 years, he transitioned to veterinary medicine to have a greater impact. Aaron, thank you for joining me.
Yeah. So one small change as of about 2.5 weeks ago, I joined CoVet. So one of the AI startup companies. So no longer the executive director of the Innovation Council.
Edit there. No longer executive director, focusing all in on CoVet. Cool. Well, after entering this industry myself a few years ago, basically everybody I knew and everybody I know was like, Aaron is the leader of innovation in veterinary medicine. So if you want to talk about something, you talk about it with Aaron, and here we are. So what I want to know a little bit is how you started in philosophy and then wound up talking to me right now. But between then, how you got into vet med, where you saw the opportunity, give a little bit of the story there.
It's funny because I've just had, I think, more exposure than some of the other people who I think are like really innovating. And so I've had a really amazing opportunity just to interact with people who are doing some amazing things. And so my job is basically like talking about that. And so consolidating it, bringing it together, that sort of thing. So I've just been really lucky from that perspective. How I went from philosophy to veterinary medicine was I was working on my PhD. I met somebody and she introduced me to the field of veterinary medicine. This year we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And so she was the entrance into that. And she was a vet, and is teaching at CSU. And she introduced me to somebody who you should absolutely talk to at some point, Dr. Adam Little. So the work that he's done in the profession has been amazing, and by far and away one of the smartest people I've ever met. So he taught me everything about the future of veterinary medicine, precision medicine, the future of diagnostics, telemedicine, just tons of different topics, being able to bring them all together into one single idea of what the future could look like. And so that was really my entrance into vet med. And then it's kind of taken off since then.
That sort of transition, I'm thinking about philosophy. I'm thinking about, obviously philosophy is a gigantic area of study, just like anything else. But were you study or most interested in kind of like future of society and morals and ethics and medicine? Is that why you were like, oh, vet med's like applicating this idea right now? Or was it just a total like, oh, I was interested in ancient texts and now I'm going this way?
Yeah, it has more overlap than just like, I'm reading Plato and then the next day I'm talking to people about AI in their practices. So I had taught courses on animal ethics. I was learning about the space, about animal welfare, that sort of thing. And the thing that kind of like brings both of it together is just this really simple idea of how do we live a good life. And it became really clear to me that part of living a good life is being surrounded by animals and having that human animal bond. And so for me, it's kind of an extension of what I was doing before, because now I have the opportunity to support those people who are providing for the healthcare of those animals. And so it really is more continuous than it probably looks like on the surface.
On the resume, it looks a little bit, I mean, it's fascinating. I love it. But I had some questions about that. So tell me more about your commitment to vet med. So you make this change. You were at Texas A&M, right? And you said, I'm going to start this entrepreneurship academy, which sort of rolled into the Veterinary Innovation Council or Summit. How did that play out? And then now you've kind of have your hands in a lot of moving new organizations, new practice models, and now latest CoVet, which we'll get to. I'm sure. But how did that all play out, and what did you see with entrepreneurship and innovation at the start back in 2016 or whenever that was?
Yeah, that was really Adam. So when I first started talking with him, it was just serendipitous that my wife took a job at the Houston SPCA. And so we were down in Houston, Adam was up in Canada, and Eleanor Green needed some support on site at Texas A&M, so the former dean of A&M. And so it was really Adam's idea with Eleanor to build the Veterinary Innovation Summit. And then we were sitting down and talking about how do we support students and how do we expose them to these different ideas. And so Adam is very much like the big thinker kind of guy. And then I was like, all right, how do we actually implement this? Like, how do we bring this into practice? So we started working on those projects, ran some hackathons and some other things just to kind of get that off the ground. And then it grew from there. So Adam left shortly after that. And then I continued on with the Veterinary Innovation Summit. And then around the same time, the Veterinary Innovation Council was forming. And so it just made sense to be able to support each other. Eventually, I became the executive director of the Innovation Council. And when Dr. Eleanor Green left Texas A&M, there was an opportunity to merge the Innovation Summit into the Innovation Council. And so that's how those things came together. But really, the ideas were not mine, at least at the beginning. It was really about trying to take those ideas from other people and bring them into practice.
And make them become real life. So now talk to me about CoVet. Talk to me about your latest endeavor. This is the newest one. There's been a lot of commotion. That was sort of why I reached out to you in the first place, was like, oh, now he's a part of a true, maybe commercial product that's still being developing. Still, we don't know where the future of AI is going to look like or what it's going to do, but you've said, I want to be a part of this group and their mission, and talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for a little over a year, I've been watching all these startup companies with the just basic technology of being able to transcribe what's happening during the physical exam. And then the next step was being able to put that into a SOAP format. And with the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, this became a whole lot easier for companies in general. So there were a couple of companies that started off right at the very beginning with a product in market. CoVet was one of those early companies. And then there was an explosion of these companies that hit the market. I think at one point there was 35 to 40 of these companies just in veterinary medicine. And then there were a bunch in human medicine that started to come over. And so we were looking at, as the Innovation Council, we were looking at this and just saying, okay, this is clearly a new opportunity, but this is crazy. There's no way that the market is going to support all these companies. So we just started digging into it a whole lot more, using basic things that we know about evaluating startups. What is the team? What is the technology stack that they're using? Do they understand product market fit? Do they have appropriate levels of funding in order to be able to drive sufficient revenue? So that they're not just dependent on that funding anymore, like all the standard things that you would look at when you're evaluating startups. And there were a few that rose to the top, and CoVet was absolutely one of them. So I met the team and I was just super impressed by the guys and what they were able to build. And the fact that there's a veterinarian as one of the co-founders is amazing. And then started digging into where they're going and what the vision for the future looks like. And I was just so impressed. And then, completely unsolicited from my side, the guys said, hey, we're looking for a VP of partnerships. Do you know of anyone? And I've been looking at these startups for a long time, right? For like almost a decade. And telemedicine, it was amazing, but it didn't really have the traction that it needed in order to become this much bigger thing. And so I saw the lessons from that. And then I saw what was happening with the scribing companies as they were becoming co-pilots. And I'm like, this is different. This is totally different. I've never seen adoption like this before. Our biggest barrier is just awareness. But as soon as a veterinarian picks it up, downloads the app, starts using it, they very rarely ever turn back. They're saving 2 hours a day. Like, I could just go on and on and on about the amazing things that are happening as a result of this. But I said, I want to be part of this. I want to help this, because I knew that it was more than just scribing. It was communication feedback. It was providing differentials. It was providing communication support for the veterinarian plus the team. Like, all of the things that get layered on top of that. And we are just at the very beginning of what this is going to look like in the next couple of years. And the most important thing for me is, it goes back to a comment that Steve Eidelman said to me, so the founder of Modern Animal, said to me a while ago. He said, look, there's all these companies and they're developing products and they think that they're the best products ever. And they just kind of pitch them over to the veterinarian and say, here's the best product ever. And it really is more frustrating for the veterinarian than anything else, because these are bolt-on solutions that do not make the veterinarian's experience any better. Whereas with these co-pilots, it's completely different, because the primary thing is making the veterinarian's experience better. So for me, I'm like, okay, this is amazing. We got to get into this. They asked if I'd be interested in being VP partnerships. I'm like, absolutely. Let's go. So that's been 2.5 weeks, somewhere around there. Started at WVC, and it's been amazing just to even watch the evolution of the company over the past couple of weeks, because the speed with which they're able to move and the way that they're able to respond to customer requests is just amazing.
Couple of things there. First, on the, let's talk about, maybe we don't need to talk about telemedicine too much, but let's jump into that a little bit, because I feel that we all, in hindsight now, can go, oh, all that commotion and all that argument and opinions that were flying around don't really matter. From my perspective, telemedicine was a lot. It's another tool. It's another tool, and it allows a practitioner, if they want, to utilize this tool legally and be safe, as long as they check the box of, maybe I've seen this patient before, but maybe not, but I know how to ask the right questions to get my answer. That's really what this was about. And there was a lot of thought or conversation of, oh, telemedicine, people aren't going to come to the clinic anymore, and pharma is going to go through the roof because people are prescribing, and like all this crazy stuff. But what are the core things that you saw from that period? Because that was kind of like COVID 2020 to maybe 2020, end of 2022. It was all about telemedicine. What have you seen were the biggest successes, and now I think we could call it failures, or even just stagnation of telemedicine as a technology in vet med that you're looking at with this AI revolution of what to do well and what to not do?
Yeah. It was funny, right? Because a lot of people were saying, telemedicine isn't good medicine and all this kind of stuff. And it was really weird from my perspective, because telemedicine includes pretty much any form of electronic communication. So if somebody is picking up the phone and having a conversation with a client about the healthcare of their animal, that's part of telemedicine. And so for people to have this like knee-jerk reaction against telemedicine and say, like, I'm not doing telemedicine, I'm like, well, did you send an email to a client about the health of that animal today? And they're like, oh yeah, I do that every day. And I'm like, okay, do you get paid for that? And they say no. And I'm like, okay, well, telemedicine, as it's evolving, is a means by which you can get paid for your professional opinion, which is worth a ton. Right. So a lot of it was convincing people that they should get paid for the things that they're actually doing already. And so there was just that lesson, just making sure that veterinarians were getting paid for their time, because it's something that it's taken them decades to build up. And so we should provide for that. So then another lesson from it was that it was kind of a bolt-on thing, right? So especially during COVID, when people were having curbside appointment visits, and it was just an extra layer of difficulty that people were going through. And I feel like, if you follow the Gartner hype cycle, right? Like at the beginning, telemedicine was like causing all of this hype, as you identified, with like pharma and all these different issues that were coming through, and people worrying about overprescribing, especially with antibiotics and that sort of thing. And I'm like, well, it doesn't actually matter what the means is. It just matters, is the veterinary using their judgment appropriately? And that's what it kept coming down to. But everyone, were all up in arms about it. So I think the biggest thing that we learned from that is that the things that streamline and make things easier for veterinarians are the things that are going to be adopted by the industry. And the things that don't are going to be painful. And there might be a use case for them. So, for example, if you look at it, most veterinarians are not comfortable diagnosing any sort of disease through telemedicine alone. But there are particular types of things that they can look at, right? So if you have a camera at home and it's looking at the behavioral conditions of the animal, the derm, or anything like kind of superficial level, then it's easier for a veterinarian to be able to identify what's going on with that animal. And so what we had was, instead of like telemedicine being this massive thing that's going to solve all these problems or create all these problems, you follow through the Gartner hype cycle and you're like, okay, there are very particular cases, things like triage, things like derm conditions, things like behavior, that telemedicine is actually really good at. And so it's the development of those use cases that have given us that like kind of plateau of productivity, but it just wasn't the massive change that I think a lot of people were aiming for. So I think those are a couple of the key things. Was that, one, this was a tool that veterinarians could use in order to charge appropriately for their time. And then two, it's not going to fundamentally change everything. But there are particular cases that are really beneficial to use something like telemedicine in.
We keep talking about and thinking about these product solutions, new tools as bolt-on. And you mentioned talking about CoVet, how it's maybe going down a path of not being bolt-on. I want to jump into this a little bit because obviously, as a entrepreneur in the space and also growing and scaling my own veterinary network with my partners, we've seen a lot of these tools come across our desk, come across our emails that are like, hey, this is so great, XYZ. And it's what you say, it's bolt-on. What I have now realized is that bolt-on means bolt on to your PIMS, or for people who don't know what that is, practice management software. And I would say the constraint or the bottleneck in innovation in veterinary medicine is this hard grip, iron fist grip of PIMS in the veterinary space. I'll just call them all out right now. Now, the mere fact that we have to go to individual PIMS and ask for API access, beg for it, and then pay them just to get API access is like a huge warning sign. In tech, in most other industries, you can just go get API documentation, and if you have an instance of it, read and write back to it, as long as you have the right keys and actually pay for an instance of it. Anyway, we don't need to rant about that. My question is, if we have this bottleneck where we're trying to develop innovative solutions, but have this bolt-on antiquated base, which really the PIMS is the database of these practices and networks, how is CoVet, or how are you thinking about creating a solution that doesn't feel bolt-on, but still works with antiquated systems?
Yeah, there's a few different things. So one is trying to work with those companies directly. As you said, it can be challenging. And I think that there are good reasons for that, right? Like there's just, from what I see, and I don't understand the technology in perfect detail, but for APIs, everyone is going to be a little bit different. And so for those companies that own the PIMS to say, hey, here's an API, just give us whatever, $2 per call or whatever it is, that puts their data integrity at risk. So I understand to a certain degree, especially if you're writing back to the PIMS and not just reading from the PIMS, then you could be putting a whole bunch of crap in there that then causes problems for them. So I kind of understand it from that perspective. I also understand it from the perspective of like the backlog, the number of people who are requesting things from those PIMS providers. And I don't think that this is really part of their business model, is to make money off of the people who are using this, at least sufficiently to warrant the amount of labor costs that are associated with building out the APIs that are required for it. So on the one hand, I totally understand. We still want to work directly with them, and that's definitely an approach that we're taking. There are other companies that you can work with that are kind of workarounds, so they have access from the back end to be able to use. So we're talking with companies like that. And then there are some things that we're doing right now, like there's Chrome browser extensions where you can have it where it actually drops it into the medical record for you. You just have to have the browser extension open. And then there's some stuff that, like, I don't know when this is going to hit, but if you watch, for example, OpenAI's Operator and some of these like agentic AI programs, they'll actually do the work for you. And so are we going to need these integrations, these APIs in the future? I don't think so, but I don't know exactly when that's going to happen. And when I talk to some people who know way more about this than I do, they're like, yeah, we're not nearly as close as people think we are. It's not like booking a hotel. It's a fundamentally different kind of experience. And so it's going to take a while to get there. But if that does happen, and we just have a tool like CoVet and say, add this to the patient record of Miss Jones with Fluffy, and it populates the patient record, then all that integration stuff that we think we need right now kind of goes away. And then you start thinking about that a little bit more, and you're like, okay, well, if it can actually write to the PIMS and it can actually start writing code, where do we go from there? Right? Like, what kind of software is actually required? What does the user interface look like? There's so many things that it opens up questions about, and you're just like, whoa. Because I don't know, some of the older people in the crowd remember things like DOS and the switch over to like Windows, and how it became like programs were these like discrete entities that you would switch back and forth from, and everything is Windows based. And so you have all these different programs and it's actually not beneficial, right? Because you're leveraging the program in order to accomplish a task. But what happens when the software is able to write its own code to develop its own software to accomplish the task? Then like Windows and the way in which we experience computers today goes away. And that's fascinating, but we're a little ways away from that.
Yeah, and the classic thing everybody will say is we're a little ways away from that, but that's also right around the corner. I don't know. I think about these things, and I, like you, am fascinated by a lot of it, and am trying to picture for the veterinary space, what is the future of a PIMS? And I am not sure or aware of any one that is actually what it looks like. Like I mentioned, what I've realized over the last couple of years is that the PIMS is positioning, or PIMS have been positioning themselves as the database. And that's why we get so much resistance and friction to trying new things, is because you talk about switching costs, or you talk about data migration, and veterinarians, rightfully so, pull out their hair going, well, what's going to happen to my patients? Am I going to have all my records? Am I going to have all my notes, all my asterisks, all my little whatever it may be in this new system? And it's like, well, you're talking about migrating databases. That's what you're doing. And so now it's like, well, how do we change the interface that you're talking about, make it the future of an interface, which doesn't look like anything we've ever seen, but keep your data intact? And what does that look like? So in terms of CoVet's vision, paint me the vision that you were sold to join.
Honestly, it didn't take a whole lot because I could already see a lot of what they were trying to do. Um, when you think of the points of friction in the veterinary hospital and you think about what AI is capable of doing today and where that's going in the future, it's unbelievable. So, for example, almost every bit of technology, every bit of software is built around the experience outside of the exam room. All the diagnostics, all the PIMS, all that kind of stuff is all outside the exam room. We've never really been inside the exam room. And by that, I mean things like being able to provide support for the veterinarian, being able to transcribe their record for them, just so, it saves them an hour and a half to 2 hours every day. Um, Being able to provide veterinarians with the most up-to-date literature on a particular disease. So everything being just in time. We've never had that capability before. So if a veterinarian is sitting there and describing some complex cancer or something like that, and they're like, I just wish that I had access to the latest literature on this particular disease. Well, they're going to now have access to that. And not just like the literature in general, but like the particular line of the particular paper that's going to influence how they make that decision and provide more support for them. So there's examples of things like that that are just part of the exam itself. And then there's things like communication feedback. So we know that one of the primary reasons why any veterinarian has to go before a state board is because of a communication issue. It's often not the case that it's a medical mistake. It's often because of a communication error. So if we could help those veterinarians get better at communication, then it reduces their anxiety. There's less issues that are going to the state board. The animal owners feel more connected. Like there's all these different parts of it. So could a veterinarian go into an exam and say, um, talk to an owner about like DKA or some complex thing, Addison's, Cushing's, whatever, and then walk out of that exam and say, how did that go? Did I explain that appropriately? And get immediate feedback. Like we can do that today, and we've never been able to do that before. But CoVet can do that today. So access to the most up-to-date literature, being able to query medical records. So you could have a few hundred pages of medical records, and you could say, when was the last time that this particular drug was given to that animal? You can have all of that served up to you. And so it's reducing the unnecessary cognitive load that's associated with everything from like paperwork and research and all of these different aspects, and saying, what is the exact information that you need in order to make the best decision possible? And so the empowerment of the veterinarian is something that we've never been able to tap into on this level. So super excited about that. And then on top of that, the academic institutions are starting to use it, and they're using it not only in clinics, but training students on how to use it. And then other things like students are going into lectures, hitting record, and then walking out of a lecture, having a summary of that lecture. And we built a template that has quiz questions that are associated with that lecture. So students are going in, they're having a better experience because they're fully immersed in the environment and not worried about like, did I copy down every single thing that I need, and just trying to absorb the material as much as possible. And then using germane cognitive load in order to determine whether or not they've actually retained the information. So there's just across the board all sorts of different ways where we're supporting the veterinarians. And I don't see other companies moving as fast. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to join the team.
Let's talk a little bit about the business, as much as that you're willing to share. Who are the target customer today, and what is the biggest pushback that you're getting from this group?
Target customer is GPs. They're typically the ones who are writing a ton of medical records. So GPs, and then specialists as well. Right. If an animal is going to a specialist, typically there's a complex medical history that's associated with that animal. And so being able to serve that up to the specialist in a way that makes sense to them. But yeah, GPs, specialists, but then also the additional team members. So for technicians, technicians can use the tool as well to be able to see the medical history, to be able to ask questions of the medical history, to be able to call the client. So you can actually call the client through the app, and it will, just like you would for a physical exam, it will take a summary of that conversation and put it into the medical record. Um, yeah, and the biggest barrier is that people don't know about it. It's unbelievable how many people have no idea that this technology exists. And it's amazing to see what happens when they go and use it and they never turn back. And there are some people who have said very specifically, like, if I don't have this tool at my job, I won't be at that job. And I'm like, well, okay, that seems a little bit hyperbolic. Like, are you seriously? And there are veterinarians who are saying this now, that it, so yes, CoVet in particular, but the scribing tools and the co-pilots in general, they provide so much value to the veterinarian that they are unwilling to practice without them.
That is part of what I was going to get at, especially when you were talking about students or schools, teaching programs, getting these cohorts to try it. What I think about and what I sort of know is that, or I proposed a question one time saying, what happens in 2029 when we graduate a full cohort of veterinarians and even other medical professionals, the mid-level practitioners and the RVTs or LVTs, and they went through their entire program using CoVet, or they went through their entire program using a generic ChatGPT or Claude. What happens then? They are going to get into a practice that uses one of these ancient systems and have to remember everything in their head. Like, it's going to be so fundamental. And that's with everything in every industry right now. Uh, I, I'm excited to hear that for CoVet, that you're hearing once they use it, they never want to turn it off. That's how you know you've created a fundamentally, kind of paradigm shifting product. The pushback that I would imagine is, well, you're not using your brain anymore. Or, well, if what happens if the internet shuts off, things like that. What is kind of the response from CoVet or from you on that sort of thinking? Because I don't know. I think about kids growing up with phones. We were interacting with a client yesterday, and we were asking the daughter of this dad. The dad was on the phone. We wanted to look him up. Said, "Hey, what's your dad's phone number?" And for me, in my generation, your generation, your dad's phone number. She was like, I don't know my dad's phone number because it's just dad in the phone and I just press it. It's just fundamentally changing. So how do you think about that with this cohort of medical professionals that have these tools that almost wouldn't want to do their job without it?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to break it down into individual components, right? So if you said, for example, veterinarians don't know how to write their own medical record, I don't think that's quite true. So even if they're using CoVet all day, every day, they still have to review the medical record to make sure that it's accurate. And so what has to be in their head is a very clear understanding of what a good medical record looks like. All we're doing is taking away the transcription portion of that, right? And so for that alone, I think, like, am I worried about that? I'm not. Like, because if they don't have the tool, often people will pay for it themselves just because they find it so valuable. But even if for some reason that's not possible, they still know what a good medical record looks like. And they have to know what a good medical record looks like, if for no other reason than to protect themselves from any sort of problems that they might have with the state board down the road. So that's one portion of it. But then let's look at some other ways in which AI is being used. So say, for example, coming up with a differential set. Even when they're coming up with a set of differentials, it is always going to be the case that the veterinarian is going to know more about the context of that animal than the AI can pick up on in a conversation. because they're bringing in all sorts of other contextual information to bear on that particular instance. And so that's why it can never replace clinical reasoning. The veterinarian always has to say, does this make sense to me? And if the AI is producing a result like a potential treatment plan and the veterinarian's like, this doesn't make sense to me, they have to be empowered to say, I need to do more research or I need to figure out what's going on. And so that like clinical reasoning always needs to be there. So am I concerned about that? Not as much. But let's talk about some other things, like, for example, things that are using machine learning for diagnostic tools. There's almost no way to figure out and to produce something like explainable AI in those moments, because the algorithms have been trained for years, and it's not always possible to see exactly why a particular result came out of a particular diagnostic tool. So in those instances, I'm a little bit more concerned because the veterinarian can't do a lot more digging into it. All they can do is kind of accept it or reject it. It becomes a little bit more problematic. And those tools are just going to get more and more advanced down the line, right? And we're seeing more and more being able to be pulled out of them, like whether it's like VetScan Imagist or some of the tools that IDEXX is building. It's just getting more and more complicated. And so it's becoming harder and harder to stay up to date on what's going on. So there are certain things that I am concerned about and certain things that I'm not concerned about. I have always been concerned about people developing appropriate levels of clinical reasoning as they go through school. Like, it's just really, really hard to do, to absorb all of the information and then develop a critical perspective that relies on your own, in a lot of ways, emotional response to that. Like, does this feel right or does this feel wrong? And teaching people that that's a really important tool for them, that feeling of right and wrong. I've always been concerned that that is not being taught well enough. That might be different from school to school, but I think that that is going to be the thing that supersedes all of the other concerns. Is, does the veterinarian have appropriate clinical decision-making ability? And how do we reinforce that with them appropriately? And that, I think, will help people navigate all this AI stuff.
I will paint a vision for you. What happens in the case where all of these systems, all of these AIs start exceeding any intuition any one person could have? And then let's just pretend that we have an error rate of 1 out of a million. That is still extremely small compared to an error rate of a human. We know that. So how do we, in terms of, let's go down legality, let's just pretend we had a clinic that we had in-person support staff, in-person technical staff that know how to perform or administer treatments, but are not making the decision on which treatment or diagnostic, test to run. Instead, AI is making that decision, and there's humans actually administering it. But then let's say that AI makes a mistake. How do we say, oh, is that okay or is that not? Because right now it feels like everybody is attempting to hold AI decision mistakes at a much higher standard than they do humans, even though the standard is just completely different. For example, with the radiology example, for reading scans, if they made the wrong diagnosis, oh my gosh, the AI doesn't work, it doesn't understand. Well, this was one mistake out of literally 5 million scans. So what gives?
Yeah, I remember part of the conversation when Uber came in, and then we started talking about self-driving cars and how it was going to be essential to demonstrate that they were nearly flawless. And the response from like the people who were developing the autonomous vehicles were like, okay, we can aim for that, but doesn't it just need to be better than the average human? And people are like, no, it has to be like near perfect. And I'm like, okay, whatever. um yeah, because so I have a Tesla and I got the full self-driving mode on it, And sometimes it makes mistakes. And so my foot is like always hovering over the brake, just in case, right? Okay. Now, for me, that's really clear. The car's making a mistake and I can correct that mistake. But I think what you're getting at is a much more complicated situation whereby the person doesn't necessarily know if a mistake is being made. And that's when things get really problematic and really challenging. And I don't have a really good answer for that, other than to say that it's not an either or kind of situation where it's either the human or the machine. But it's how those two things work with each other and work well. And all I can say is that there are a lot of companies who are developing AI tools right now, and a lot of them are doing it really well. And they're incorporating the feedback from the veterinarian, and they're there to help support the veterinarian and supplement the work that they're doing. But that's not the case across the board. And so veterinarians have to be very diligent about the kinds of companies that they want to support and how they want to support them. And if a company is unwilling to take feedback from a veterinary professional on their product because it doesn't work in their workflow or it's producing results that are not helpful and beneficial, that's a pretty big red flag. And we should not be supporting those companies and helping those companies. We should only be supporting the ones that are trying to work with the veterinarians and not just displace them. Could it be the case that at some point in the future, our diagnostics and differentials and treatment plans and that kind of stuff are going to supersede the capacity of any individual? Like we're there in like very limited use cases right now. Like computer vision is able to pick up on things that the human eye can't see because it's able to use like multidimensionality or thermal imaging, different kinds of computer vision to be able to pick up on, for example, a nodule that a human can't see or a particular change in the gait of an animal that a human can't see. So we're already there with some things, and it's only going to get more complicated. And for those veterinarians who just want to say, like, I'm 2 years away from retirement, like, I'm out, fine. But for people who are graduating today, they have to become aware of these tools and how to use them for the best care of the animal, because they are going to provide a better level of care, potentially to more animals. And I would love to say more cheaply, that's the hope. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but that's definitely part of the aim.
We can go down that path for a minute. The price of care and the potential is that with this futuristic application of veterinary medicine, that it could be so accessible because of the root solution being, okay, we have AI models that do almost every aspect of our practice. Therefore, we can have more professionals actually doing care rather than ordering inventory or managing staff or answering phones, etc. If in that case, then the overhead for the clinic or for the group, as we're seeing, goes down. And so now you can offer care at a lower cost. And then you also have the ongoing debate of open source versus closed private models. And there's like this huge debate in AI right now, and it's a big race. And I don't really know which one will end up the victor. The kind of positive mindset says, oh, let's have it be open source. And then everybody just has open source everything all the time, but who knows? So anyway, on that note, let's go to corporate adoption. And what do you think they're going to be looking for with these tools? Are they using these tools? I mean, obviously, corporate groups care about one thing, and that's the bottom line. And that's their job. I mean, you can't get mad at them for that. That's the job of the corporation. So their job is to bring value to their shareholders. What is going to bring adoption there?
It's interesting. Um, an article is going to come out relatively soon, if it hasn't already, by Bob Lester. and it's going to be in today's veterinary business. And it's specifically talking about the evolution of the veterinary industry. For some reason, I'm not really sure where this came from, but people think about the evolution of any industry in terms of innings. So the first three innings are kind of chaotic and kind of all over the place. And there's all these like mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling, and EBITDA prices or EBITDA multiples are all over the place, and blah, blah, blah. And then you get into the middle three innings, and all of a sudden everything like calms down. There's less M&A activity, and there's more focus on developing the core business strength. And then later on, you get into like full development of the industry, and there's not a whole lot of change. Innovation is like kind of slowing down and or becoming stagnant. And his point, and it seems right what he's saying, is that we are moving out of that first three innings and we're moving into the middle period. And one of the characteristics of that middle period is the idea that you can't just create value because you've increased your EBITDA. You can't just create value because you've consolidated a couple of practices and so you're able to flip them more quickly, because people just aren't as interested in that. And so what happens is that you need to think longer term about this. And so instead of like a 2-year like hold and flip, it's more of like a 7 to 10-year hold and flip. And so, or recapitalization. So then what happens during that period is you have to have stability in the organization. So we start looking for things like, what is your turnover rate? Both for clients and for staff. What are the things that you're doing in order to build those staff members so that it creates a really sticky culture that they want to be part of long term? What do your medical outcomes look like? And how is that perpetuating this idea of reducing churn of staff and clients? And so you start to see this like really nice alignment between medical needs and business needs. And some of the more progressive practices have moved into that already, and some of them haven't, and they might not. And that's a thing too. But for the ones that are creating that strong alignment between medical outcomes and business outcomes, those are going to be the more sustainable companies that I think are going to be longer lasting and drive into those later innings. And the valuation of those is going to be higher than some of the other companies that are just like, well, we put on a new coat of paint on the inside, so therefore give us an extra, $20,000 in our valuation, right? It's like, no, like that doesn't work anymore. So as much as I want to agree with you that, like Milton Friedman, the purpose of the business is just to increase profit for shareholders, like I don't think that that's the time that we're moving into. I think we're moving into this other space where there is greater alignment between business and medical outcomes.
I would push back and say only that the objective, this inning, changes how we're getting shareholder value. That the goal is still shareholder value, but now it's not M&As and fresh coat of paint and flip like the first three innings. Now it's, oh crap, our business has to actually be a business. And in order for it to be a business, we need good culture and retention and stickiness and all the things you're talking about, which will drive the shareholder value. So that's my only pushback there. Is the goal of any corporation is to bring shareholder value. And so now it's just about how do we get it. Couple of topics lastly here to wrap up with our open-ended, but just curious, number one, being in your shoes, being from your perspective on the industry, what do you think about, and this is a huge question, insurance?
It's really unfortunate that we haven't hit the tipping point where the costs are going to come down and we're going to get more adoption across the board. But you can't reduce costs and be a viable business. So, what is going to change that? And some people have said that the rising cost of care is actually going to be beneficial for insurance because people are going to be more likely, with hearing about cases of the $35,000 or $80,000 vet bill, they want insurance in order to reduce the risk that's associated with that. And if we get wider adoption, then the prices go down. It does seem like there are organizations like NAFIA, the North American Pet Health Insurance Association, that are trying to work together towards everyone's benefit. But it does seem to be the case that a lot of the independents are just working kind of independently from each other. And so there isn't this like consolidated approach towards insurance, which might help to drive it. Then you look at organizations like JAB and what they have within their insurance portfolio, and you're just like, holy crap, they have a lot of products, they have a lot of companies that exist within that portfolio. And so maybe that consolidation is happening within an organization like JAB. And the fact that they're still acquiring insurance companies, like, these are not dumb people. They must see something in the market, in the development of that marketplace, that is going to allow for greater insurance adoption. But I know, like, for our animals, we have a bunch in the house, and the prices just didn't make a whole lot of sense to us. And part of that is because my wife's a veterinarian, so we don't have the exam bills and that kind of stuff, and so she's able to perform physical exams as many times a day as we want. But I and then I look at places like the UK, and like, why is it that insurance has a much higher penetration rate? And I don't really know. And people speculate and say, well, they're just used to this idea, and so they don't think about it in terms of like, okay, if this insurance policy is $70 a month, and that's X amount over the course of a year, and the average amount that I'm going to spend during the course of the year is less than that, so therefore it doesn't make sense to have an insurance policy. It seems like people in the UK don't make that calculation for some reason. And I'm not really sure what that is, but that seems to be the driving motivating factor here in the US and Canada as well. It's this focus on like, what is the ROI of the insurance policy? And we're not regulated to have these insurance policies like we are with cars, for example. Yeah, I don't know. It's a fascinating space, and it's just been kind of like very incrementally growing year over year. And I don't know when we're going to hit that tipping point where it's going to create a much broader mass market adoption. Maybe JAB sees it, and that's their play.
Yeah, it's. I don't have many thoughts there. I just only watch and listen, and I'm not sure I'm sold on insurance. My take on insurance only is that because we don't have the insurance interest group widely prevalent, we have more true market dynamics to observe. And we can watch true use case or compliance, as we always say, or treatment execution, because we don't have that group to be involved in the decision making. So that's kind of nice, but obviously you have all of the access to care problem becomes more and more prevalent, especially for advanced treatments and things. It's strictly what's your tax income bracket, and okay, you'll do it or you won't. So that's another episode. Closing up here, what's the next thing on CoVet's agenda that we should be looking out for and excited about coming up with CoVet?
I wish I could tell you all the things that are currently in development. It's a really good question. I think in general, the way in which we're taking a look at every part of the workflow, because of the number of veterinarians and technicians, people from a veterinary background, they understand veterinary medicine in a deep and meaningful way. And being able to take a look at all of the challenges that veterinarians experience, and we're slowly chipping away at those and making the experience better for the veterinarian overall. Even simple things like, we saw veterinarians who would open up the app and then open up their phone, put their phone on speakerphone, click record on the app, and then have their phone so that when they're talking with the client, then CoVet was recording the conversation. And we're like, well, why don't we just run it through CoVet, right? And so then even conversations that people are having are part of the medical record now. There's everything from discharge summary notes and being able to customize those very specifically to very particular kinds of people, so that you can say this person is a medical professional, and so you could explain it to them on that level, or you could explain it to them because, you know, it's a 5-year-old and it's her first puppy, and how do you explain it to them, right? So there's all sorts of different levels of personalization that are coming out. University partnerships, so that students are getting hands-on experience with these tools, is pretty amazing. Yeah, there's so much. And even by the time that we finish this recording and you post it online, there's going to be more things that we have launched. Like, I would like to say, and I did say, that we're slowly chipping away at it, but it is really lightning speed. And I've never experienced this as part of a startup before. So it's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you for joining me, Aaron. This episode was with Dr. Aaron Massecar, who is VP of Partnerships at CoVet.